I purchased a new 72-pin connector for my Nintendo Entertainment System console, and it's definitely time that I replace it. Hey Nintendo fans and collectors, Lithium here for my channel Nintendo Collecting, bringing you a video or a how-to video of installing the 72 NES pin connector, which is really useful because I think these consoles are notorious for eventually having that blinking red light, and you can see that this is up a little bit because I did remove some screws to make this whole process a little bit easier. So if you're having problems with your NES console and you love playing retro games on the original consoles, you should consider getting one of these. Now, I bought this for $15 Canadian at a local game shop. You can probably find them online sometimes for $10. I think anything under $20 will get your system working properly. Just make sure it's new, obviously, because the pins eventually bend and break over time and the connections lose their function, so you want to replace it. So essentially, what you're going to have to do in order to actually remove everything you need to is just a Phillips head screwdriver. That is all you need. Now, first things first, you're going to turn over the console and you're going to remove 6 screws. And the 6 screws you're going to remove are in these deep holes here. So you need a long Phillips head screwdriver. So there's one here, this is 2, and you have 3, 4, 5, and 6. So once you remove them, put the screws off to the side just to make sure you don't lose any of them. And then actually, I'm going to turn the console back over, facing you, and you can take off the top now of the console, which is pretty cool. So keep in mind throughout this video, the front of the console is here and the back is over here. So next, what you're looking at here, actually, is the inside of an NES console. That's pretty cool. I've never looked at this before. This is my first time opening one up, which is crazy. So here you have the heat shield. This is the metal component of it. And there are 6 or 7 screws holding this down. I say 6 or 7 because mine only had 6, but I think most consoles actually have 7. So the screw locations, you can kind of see whatever's on the metal holding them down, but there's 1 here, 2, there's 3 and 4 at the back. Then there is a 5th, a 6th, and potentially a 7th. You should have 7. I don't know why mine only had 6. So then again, I put the screws over on the side. So next, you can actually wedge up this heat shield. And there you go, put that on the side, and you should also make sure that you keep the screws on the side for that so you don't lose them either. Alright, next you are actually looking at the mechanism to put games in that kind of pops up, pops down, which is pretty cool. So this one has 4 screws connecting to them. I already removed the 4 screws over here. Now, 2 of them are a bit longer, so you just have to make sure you're removing them and keeping track of where you're actually putting them. But the screw locations, you can kind of see on the black plastic, there's 1 here, and there's 2 others on the side. So remove those as well, keep the screws on the side, and now you can kind of just pick this up a little bit, and you can wedge out this one component. You just need to make sure you're getting past the front lip of the console to take this actually out. And this has the spring of moving it up and down, which is really neat actually. So put that on the side as well. Now you're looking at the motherboard for the console, which is really kind of crazy. So this one is over 20 to 25 years old. It's exceptionally old, and it's still in pretty good condition. And to remove the motherboard, you may have to remove some screws. So it depends what you're looking at. But mine, there was 2 screws I had to remove. There was one right here, and there was also one right here. So I put those 2 screws on the side. Most screws are the same, but just in case they're not, that's why I'm doing that. So I removed those 2 screws. Most of your motherboard feels like it's loose, but I must tell you, whenever you're handling any sort of these components, please be really careful. You don't want to damage them. Of course, it is like computer parts. So this part should be able to now come up a bit, which is insane to think about, that you are moving compartments and components of the console. So just be really careful. And the bottom here sometimes gets stuck a little bit, so you want to make sure that that's not happening and that you can lift up the side. And I'm running into a little bit of problems here, but... Alright, so once you pick this up a bit, you actually don't need to move it all that much. But the key here is that from the motherboard, this is the 72-pin connector, and it's only connected underneath to the motherboard. So you have the top part and the bottom. I'm just going to turn this around for a moment. So you can see here that it is connected there. You actually don't need to move the motherboard up anymore. So what your goal here is to very, very gently wedge this off the motherboard. And keep in mind, you don't want to snap anything, you don't want to break anything, or else this console won't work whatsoever. You can hear it moving, and that was a little bit too forceful than it should have been. It should have come off a lot easier than that, but that's okay. So here is what the 72-pin connector looks like, my old one, and perhaps some of the pieces are bent and the components just aren't working that well. So I'm going to put this on the side. I don't want to use that anymore. I want to obviously put in my new one, so I'm just going to open up this bag and then look at the new one. So here's the new one, what I'm looking at, and clearly when you look at it this way, you should be able to tell. The game goes into this double piece, and the motherboard goes into the single. So you have to make sure that you know what you're actually doing with this piece, because they are identical as you can see, but you just want to make sure you're doing this properly. On my side, I actually have a really good view of these ones going onto the motherboard piece right there. So you're going to do that gently, you're going to do it slowly, because you don't want to break it. I think last time I was a bit too forceful putting it on. And this could give you some problems, and it might just take a little while, but patience is really important, I think, here, because you don't want to break anything. I had to just turn it around and really be careful walking this on slowly. So sometimes you do have to use a little bit of force, but you want to make sure you're really gentle and really careful putting this back. So when it goes on, it looks like it's very firm in there. You can actually see the 72-pin connector lining up directly with the motherboard, which is great. So it is very firm, but again, you want to use a gentle touch getting this on. I did have to use, I wouldn't say force, but I had to use a gentle touch, and I actually put one side in before the other to actually wedge it back on. So that was a little difficult part for sure. So now the new pin connector should be on there. Now what you're going to do is you're going to have to grab this piece back again. So keep in mind that this is supposed to be towards the front. So my console right now is backwards. I'm going to move it back around so that you can actually see. So keep in mind, here's the front because I've got the buttons right there. And of course, the game goes in the front. So this part has to go towards the front. And this piece, you're hopefully going to be able to wedge it right back in, and you don't actually need to use any force. If this is down, I'm told it's supposed to make it a little bit easier for you, but in the end, as long as you can get it back. So there we go, it's coming back on, and you put it all the way fully back in its place, and then the mechanism, just make sure that's still working, obviously, because you want to make sure that it is still working. Now the screws, I'm going to put back on the 4 screws that are important, because they have to go back onto the motherboard. And you want to make sure that you actually have everything lined up. So there's my heat shield. I just made sure all the lines and all the wires are working properly and they're in the right spots. I want to make sure I can get this black piece down onto the motherboard, as it should be flush with it, or else your console probably won't close properly, and that's maybe one of the problems I was having towards the beginning of the video. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to put in the 2 screws that are required to go back into these 2 places right here. I have put back the 2 screws that were holding this right here, we're holding the motherboard. So again, there was a screw down here and there was a screw here. I have already put 2 of the screws in to kind of save some time, and I'm going to put the other 2 on this side as well. So you want to make sure that this is down and connected to the motherboard. So I'm going to put in both screws. And again, making sure that it's lined up is really important. So there's one. I'm at the point now where I actually return the 2 screws that were connecting the motherboard, which you see right here, and I also return the 4 screws that are surrounding this black housing that you put the game into. Now these 4 screws right here, if you have any problems, you want to test out that this still goes up and down and locks. And if it is not locking, because you might run into problems, I did as well, you're going to loosen the screws a bit and then tighten them until it works continuously. So the front 2 screws are slightly looser than the back 2 screws. That's just what's working for my console. You might have to test out a few different things. Next up, I am putting the heat shield back onto the console. So this one you can see here, it does go back over the motherboard and the black housing, and you're also going to return those 6 or 7 screws back to their spots as well. Now that I have the heat shield back on with the 6 or 7 screws surrounding it, holding it in place, I want to just make sure that this will go up and down and stay like that. And see, right now I'm running into some problems. So if you are, you might want to just tighten or loosen some of the screws just to make sure on the side of the black shield it is working properly and that it does go up and down continuously every time. At this time also, before you even put on the top of the console, because I obviously haven't done that yet, if you have a cord connecting the system, you can actually test a game right now just to make make sure that you do have power. So I have the cord right here. I'm going to plug it into the back of that, and clearly we're going to have power, so the red light's going to go on, but it's going to give us that red blinking light because there's no game inside. So here I have Super Mario Bros. 1 and Duck Hunt, and I'm going to put that back up and put the game into the console just to test it out, putting it in firmly, pushing it down, and turning on that light. Now see how that light is obviously red? It is not blinking. That means the game is likely working. We can show it on the screen at some point as well. So I'm going to take this back out of the pin connector. Now that pin connector is much more solid than it once was. I'm also going to take the top of that box for the console, which now sits in place properly, turn the console back over, and I'm going to replace those 6 screws respectively into their spots. And there you have it. My new pin connector is installed into my console. When I open this up, you can move the game capture up and down and it will stay as it should be. I am going to test this though, so I'm going to plug in my cord and I'm going to make sure that I can actually connect this up to a television. I have the console plugged in here. I'm just going to power it on. Now that it is powered on, I can see on my television I do have Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt working. So that is how to install the 72 pin connector in the NES console. If you have any questions, feel free to ask below. I did run into a few problems, so there was some trouble solving as I went through. But I'd really appreciate if you guys commented below, give this video a thumbs up, and thank you for watching. Make sure you fill that like bucket, follow me on all the social media links in the description below the video, and remember, as always, go collect them all and keep smiling while gaming.